Welcome everyone to Engaging Community and Evaluation, Collaborative Participatory and Empowerment Evaluation webinar today. My name is Pamela and I'm the Director of Evaluating Impact with the Tamarack Institute. Before we begin, I wanted to just take a minute to reflect on the land that we're each gathering on. So we begin this workshop by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. And we're very grateful for the opportunity to meet and thank all of the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. As settlers, the recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the most of promises and the challenges of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And I invite you to add your own land acknowledgements if you'd like in the chat box at this time. Before we begin, I have the pleasure of co-presenting today with David Fetterman. David is the president and CEO of Fetterman and Associates, an international ethnographic and evaluation consultation firm. He works in a wide range of settings, ranging from the townships in South Africa to Google in Silicon Valley, with notable clients ranging from the US Department of Education, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Hewlett-Packard Foundation, to name a few. His consultation services have included clients such as Ministry of Education in Japan, Ministry of Health in Brazil, the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia, and the Te Puni Kukiri Ministry of Maori Development in New Zealand. He concurrently serves as a member of the faculty of Pacifica Graduate Institute and the University of Charleston. Dr. Fetterman has over 25 years of experience at Stanford University, as well as having many other academic honors. And finally, as many of you maybe know, he is the author of numerous articles and books ranging from topics from ethnography to empowerment evaluation. Welcome, David. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks, Pamela. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here, appreciate it.
It's really a pleasure to be doing this with you today. We've been talking about this for a little while. And so I'll just go over the introduction. Well, we've just gone over the introductions, and the presentation itself will be about 35 to 40 minutes. And then we'll have an opportunity for question and answer period, and then some final announcements at the end. So we'll just begin. I am very happy to be bringing some TLC to community engaged evaluation, I like to say. This really is an opportunity to present a little bit of a macro view about a set of criteria that I've been thinking a lot about and I think are quite important and critical to thinking about community engaged evaluation practice as we embark on sort of how we look at these processes and what we desire from these engagement evaluations with members of the community that we work with in different ways. And from my experience really through when using a collaborative participatory empowerment lens in my work, I really found that I appreciate the connections between engagement and evaluation. And really what evaluation can often lead to is not only looking at the results of the work that we are evaluating, but actually being a contributing factor to transformative social change in and of itself, which is sometimes an objective of this type of evaluation as well. Slide, please. So to begin with, I think it's important to sort of look at how we are doing evaluation. We're usually aiming to achieve a better understanding or critical understanding of the way things are being evaluated. And in doing so, we can look at the value of what evaluation has, what it gives us and what we can use it for. And in particular, we can look at evaluation as it leads to new learning strategies, shifts in thinking, the doing of the work really, and how it contributes to evidence of impact, but also of course in understanding the impact of the work that we're evaluating and the experiences that we're looking at, and the contributions to producing change itself. And so there's two ways of looking at the use of evaluation in this sense, and there's value in both. The findings use really, there are three different ways we can look at the findings use, and that would be instrumental use of findings really is the direct application of how we use what we're learning and the knowledge that we are gaining from the evaluation experience. The conceptual use of findings really looks at maybe there's no actions being taken necessarily, but we have a much better understanding of the context and the situation resulting from the intervention or the experience being evaluated. And then of course the symbolic use of findings, which is really, it's an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the situation that's being evaluated, and also look to redirecting thinking or showing evidence of and validating a process that we might have some hypotheses about. And findings use is really valuable to share back with communities when we are producing an understanding of what those results are, and sort of produce a feedback loop that can be useful when we're working in community with other stakeholders or funders, for example. And then of course, process use really engages actors in the evaluation in a way that creates a certain level of evaluation intimacy, I think, that is capable of achieving opportunities for strengthening credibility and ownership when there's an engagement with the evaluation process itself by stakeholders and the community or other actors, and really helps to build evaluation capacity. So gives community stakeholders an opportunity to build their own capacity in learning how to do evaluation, whether it's from designing the process itself or the theory of change or the tools that are required in doing the data collection, for instance. And then of course, for learning's sake, it's really more around understanding what's happening throughout the evaluation process so that adjustments can be made to the work that's being adjusted, the program or the intervention that's being adjusted in the moment. So sort of like a developmental approach. And strengthening networks and relationships is another use that is very valuable when we're looking at engagement in evaluation, and establishing a shared understanding and common ground around the program or process that's being evaluated, and looking really to understand how the work is having an influence or what's contributing to those influences. Next slide, please. So I'm really interested in sort of introducing this criteria that is participatory driven, community-based evaluation support, where we're looking at really the transparency, learning, and consent as pillars to community-based engagement in evaluation, where this TLC model is foundational criteria to lead and strengthen community-based assessment practices and strategic learning opportunities. And you'll see there's a little cartoon, it says, hello, you don't know me or trust me, but I can ask you a few questions, deep probing questions about your work. And often, in conventional processes, evaluation processes, this really can be a jarring experience where there's not a level of engagement that encourages relationship building. And so if we look to what that really means, it really is how and when does learning take place when we're thinking about engaged processes for evaluation, and why is it important? And so a large part of stakeholder engaged evaluation models, some of which David will be speaking about, require a strong commitment for developing and strengthening existing relationships at multiple levels. And it could be multiple sectors, multiple levels, and different collaborative experiences. It could be really grassroots. And whether it means we're relying on involving a diverse set of actors at different stages of the evaluation process, or at specific stages where you could see that the types of involvement can take place throughout the evaluation experience, from the design through to the data collection, analysis, and findings. And really, like, we think about the criteria of these to critically reflect on the degree to which engagement is occurring, and maybe to help understand the appropriate level of engagement. We can look at these criteria as an opportunity to give us the directions in which we need to think critically about how and at what level do we want to be transparent, and what kind of learning we want to include and ensure that's taking place throughout this process, and what kind of consent is really necessary and important and a part of the process in order to build those relationships. Next slide, please. So really, evaluation in communities relies on relationships that are strengthened among community actors and stakeholders that can then lead to some form of social change. When we think about the transparency, the degree of transparency or learning and community and consent that we're trying to consider as we design our evaluation or decide upon the level of engagement that we think is important to the evaluation work we're doing, we want to consider maybe the extent that transparency can play a role in strengthening the participatory process for evaluation. To what degree this would influence honesty and trust building, commitments and accountability among actors and stakeholders, informants, cultural responsibility. What considerations do we need to take into view around cultural responsibility and different power dynamics within the community? And by critically looking at these different degrees of transparency, we have to also consider that in some contexts, a certain level of transparency might be really high, whereas in other contexts, for instance, where we're working on issues around gender-based violence or with children or in other types of more sensitive situations, the level of transparency might not be as feasible as, for instance, in a community evaluation that's focused on the environment or some other interventions that are focused on different kinds of issues. When we think about the criteria of sort of the degrees of learning that we'd like to see and understand happen through the process, we want to think about how can learning from the evaluation process strengthen our work, and who can really learn from these processes and outcomes, what kind of capacity building is important to take into consideration in that process, and also where we would like to build and strengthen those relationships in the community experience. And then of course, when we're thinking about consent, when we talk about stakeholder engaged evaluation experiences, consent is a really important factor when we're trying to understand how to engage different community actors and different stakeholders. There's, the consideration of ethical practice, participation at different stages, data ownership is a really important one, in particular when we're talking about evaluation experiences that are within diverse communities or culturally sensitive communities, or Indigenous experiences where often elders or other band council members would like to, there's a data ownership reality that we also have to consider. And it's important that these conversations are started from the beginning of the decision-making process around how to move forward with an evaluation experience. And of course, the historical and cultural experiences as well. And so when we look at these criteria together and go through sort of the degree to which we can make these considerations as we decide on the different role that an evaluator might play, or the role of an evaluation team, or the overall experience of an organization implementing an evaluation, we want to make sure that transparency leads to trust building among community stakeholders, and that learning can lead to stronger and more committed actions among community stakeholders and members, and that consent ultimately, when we take all these things into consideration, will lead to a continuous community engagement process that becomes an empowering process as well for those involved in the experience. And so if you'd like to learn more, actually, I'll be publishing a paper soon on this, and we will be distributing it through our website. So I'm happy to follow through with that as well in the coming month. And I'll just now pass it on to David to speak more in depth about collaborative, participatory, and empowerment evaluation. On to you, David.
Thanks, Pamela. I appreciate it. I'm going to be building on what you just said by just doing more of a deep dive into stakeholder involvement approaches. What I want to highlight just briefly is that there are a variety of stakeholder involvement approaches. Let me just shoot through a couple. If you focus on the role of the evaluator, that's the easiest way to see what the differences are and the implications for our own work, both as an evaluator and also as the folks in the community, what their role then becomes. Waiting for the slide to click over. There we go. Well, Chris does a lot of beautiful, as you can see, Pamela highlighted Chris as well, beautiful cartoon work in evaluation. I worked with him for a little while I was doing this book, this latest book over here. And he captured in one cartoon most of the book. So I still buy the book, okay? But he did an impressive job. If you look at the role of in a collaborative approach to evaluation, the evaluator is in charge, but they're looking to collaborate and work with folks in the community to make this thing work and to conduct the evaluation. In participatory evaluation, it's a shared approach where they're in control, you're in control as an evaluator, and you're trying to together move the evaluation forward and hopefully help people reach their goals. In empowerment evaluation, you're doing all the same kinds of thing as you do in a normal evaluation, except you turn it upside down, where the people in the community are in charge, and you're a coach and facilitator. I have done many collaborative and participatory evaluations, and the aim for me anyway, I'll tell you as many mistakes as I can remember that I've done, is I've tried to then move it over to the folks I'm working with, but I was never particularly successful, to be honest with you. We would do it, but it'd always be leaning on me, and it would make the transition a little bit, then back again. So I thought, enough. Why not just start where you want to end? So I decided to create empowerment evaluation where community's involved, they're in charge, everything. And I'm just a coach and facilitator. I don't abdicate my responsibility and just say, take off. I'm still there to help keep it rigorous, on track and all that sort of thing. But it changes the dimension and the tone of it. And I want to highlight why that's really important as we go through some of the slides. But anyway, I have to thank Chris again. One cartoon, and he captured most of the entire book. Now, we do have case examples of each approach by the leading folks in each of these areas, so you can get more depth, of course. But I think that gives you a good feel for the differences as you think about what's the most appropriate approach for you to take. But we're going to focus on empowerment today, and let's just start with the definition. I came up with this when I was the president of the American Evaluation Association, and the definition hasn't changed very much. It's the use of evaluation concepts and techniques and findings to foster improvement and self-determination. That's over 21, 22 years ago. Now, what we've done is we've added a little bit more definition to give people even more detail, more depth, etc. And we've come up with this. It's an evaluation approach that aims to increase the probability, because there are no guarantees in life, of achieving program success. So already you can see this is not a neutral experiment of, oh, you evaluated that school or that hospital, that nonprofit situation with the programs they have operating. It didn't work. Oh, see you later. No, the people are still there. The kids are still there. So the idea is to help people use evaluation to get to where they want to go. And they do that by providing program stakeholders with the tools for assessing the planning, implementation, and self-evaluation of their program. And this is really important. Also, mainstreaming evaluation, so it's part of the planning and management of the program. It just becomes part of what a group does. I'll give you more detail on that in a minute. The picture on the left, it's some lady I worked with in township in South Africa. And what's important about that, if you're not familiar with the conditions in a lot of the, actually the squatter settlements, there's very little electricity, there's very little water, and we're talking about sometimes 20,000 people in a community. No one even knows how many there are in South Africa at this time. But the point of that slide is that when I talked with her, just across the street, just down a little ways, there's a daycare center. And my point I usually make when I talk about empowerment evaluation is the only thing you need to do one is the desire for a better life. And in spite of the conditions that she's operating in, they still have a hope for the future, for the next generation. And thus we're able to use empowerment evaluation. Let me spend the next hour and a half or two on theory, if that's okay, Pamela. Is that, oh, sorry, is this the wrong workshop? Oh, okay. Okay, maybe only a couple, maybe a minute. Hang in there, everybody. I know a lot of folks will go, oh my gosh, David will talk about it for 6 hours. Anyway, no, I could. Anyway, I just want to highlight a couple theories. One, the most important theory driving empowerment evaluation is process use. And all that process use is that the more that people are engaged in the act of conducting their own evaluations, the more likely it is that they will find the results credible and act on the recommendations. Why? Because they're theirs. We could come in as experts and with this great insight, and it'd be right on target if the organization was 10 years old and mature versus at a lower level of their organizational level of development, and kill the program. If, on the other hand, they give it to themselves, their own assessment, and they're part of that process, they're more likely to buy into it and own it. And this is critical for the entire field of evaluation. The biggest problem in the field, never mind empowerment, collaborative, participatory, is knowledge utilization. People are creating wonderful, fantastic reports and evaluations, and they sit and gather dust. This improves knowledge utilization because people own it and they're happy to move forward and act on it. So enough on that theory, unless you want to do a couple more hours. Anyway, we'll move quickly on to the next one. Oh, the next one I should say is focusing really on the role again, rather than getting too much more theory. I thought I'd skip ahead and skip. I could give you a little more theory, but I think I'm going to just focus on the core role, which is the critical friend. Instead of thinking in terms of, well, I did have this. Let's just say I had this big argument with a colleague of mine in the field who said, David, you can't have a critical friend. You're in life. You just operate on your own. You do the best you can, and you can't always be leaning on someone. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I went home and I thought, wait a second now. My daughter, does volleyball. She has a coach. My own exercise was running from the parking lot to the class. I went back to a gym. I got a coach. I didn't want to kill my back or just financial advisors. So I thought to myself, wait a minute. And in the med school, you think I'm going to let a lot of the students just take off and do whatever they want without a coach? I don't think so. So I thought to myself, no, he's wrong. What's wrong with having a coach in evaluation to help you make sure you're doing it correctly and moving forward and being credible? Anyway, Linda Delaney's the woman in the center there helping to guide. She works with me with tobacco prevention work I do to keep minority kids away from tobacco in Arkansas. It's something we have 22 different grantees, faith-based, university, nonprofit, you name it, all with the same aim of keeping minority kids away from tobacco. Well, the idea is that people monitor their own performance, but the critical friend believes in the type of program, tobacco prevention, dropout program, etc., but still asks these critical questions to ensure an honest and constructive critique. The evaluator who doesn't really get invested in the program and believe in the type of program is not going to be as critical. Someone who cares about it is going to be more critical because they want it to work. And they'll tell you, this doesn't seem to make sense. I don't quite understand this. Help me understand it. Or this is not going to be a credible result. Let's see what would be credible. Let's bring in the donor. The critical friend is there to help, just like a financial advisor, just like a mentor, etc. Let me go over the 3 steps. We don't have a lot of time today. If you want, I could read you the entire book. But we won't do that today. Well, let's start with page 1 and read. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to highlight just the 3 steps quickly. But seriously, if you do want more depth on what we're talking about today, this is the best one to look at. It's the empowerment evaluation, the most recent one with the earth on it. The other one's like 22 years old. Great book. I wouldn't buy that one. Get the most up-to-date information. But I want to highlight just the 3 steps so you can see how simple and transparent this is and why this is in 16 or 17 or 18 countries right now. Very straightforward. As I say, there are 3 steps. The first one is you'll help the group come up with a focused concept of what their mission is. It's very democratic. It's transparent. I put poster sheets on the wall if you're doing it the old-fashioned way, pre-COVID-19 as it were. We now use Google Sheets to go on and put the mission and have everyone join in there in a virtual space. And they put with their key terms that represent what they think the mission is. It gets at the group values. Now, you honor any existing mission, don't get me wrong, but you go with the energy is in the room, because that mission may have been written by a grant writer, not by anyone in the program, or maybe the director, or maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, or maybe half of the staff, but there's been 40% turnover. So what does it represent anymore? You want to go where the energy is in the room, with what people think the mission is about, that they'll be acting on. It's mental scaffolding to get you ready to do the evaluation. And in this process, you're probably familiar with this term, with a concept behind it, giving voice and making meaning. You'll see that this is a core part of empowerment evaluation as well, which is, if you've ever been to a meeting, here's a way of explaining it, and you have an interesting insight, not necessarily the most important one, but an interesting insight, and it's ignored. Or you have that concept, that idea, and you're put down for it. No, I know you've experienced it, but here's the best one. I'm sure most of us experience this one. You make an interesting point. No one really pays much attention. Someone with more stature than you comes into the room, says the exact same thing. Everyone goes, oh, what a great idea. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But that's not being allowed to give voice and make meaning. In empowerment evaluation, you'll see you are compelled to have your voice heard. It changes the whole dynamic nature of the interaction when you're doing that evaluation in this mode. Anyway, you come up with a mission. You don't wordsmith it to death. You keep on moving forward to taking stock, but maybe someone that you're working with in the community, you can then wordsmith it a little bit more, pass it around to everyone after the workshop, not just during it, and see if everyone's okay with it. And the key word is consensus. I've worked, in other words, can you live with it? I've worked with many different projects and organizations where you have to have 90% agreement, never going to happen. But consensus, can you live with it? And then if they don't like something, you change the wording, you vote it back, the group then goes, okay, I can live with that. Later, you can wordsmith it to death for a pamphlet, brochure, for marketing, for web-based stuff, etc. But not quite yet. This is just mentally to get yourself ready and the group ready. So you've done that. You've got an idea of these key terms. People have talked about it. You move into taking stock. Taking stock has two parts. The first part is really a prioritization process. And that is, you ask everyone, what are the key activities that you're engaged in right now that make that mission possible? And they list out 10, 15, 50. It doesn't matter. There's no wrong answer. It's brainstorming about what are the key activities that they are engaged in right now that make that mission possible. And then I'm very California-esque, so hang in there with me. Everybody gets 5 dots, okay? Now, on Google Sheets, you should get 5 ones, so you can just, the same thing, but you can just do it in a digital fashion. But basically, if you think communication is important, you put a dot there. That's something that we should evaluate as a group. If you think teaching is, put a dot there. Funding, put a dot there. You can put all 5 dots if you want in one place on teaching. If you think it's so important and no one else is going to go for it, fine. Or 2 in 1, 1 in 1, but you only get 5 dots. Trust me, I've experienced everything. No ripping them in half, no selling them. I mean, you wouldn't believe, people take these very seriously, and they should. Now, you don't have to use this to prioritize if you don't want to, but I have found if you don't, you can spend 3 to 4 hours arguing about what are the most important subgroup of activities for us to evaluate as a group. And people often say, David, this is not very quantitative. I go, count the dots. Pretty straightforward to me. Whatever you have the most dots, the top 10 is what you then bring into an Excel spreadsheet or a Google spreadsheet or whatever. And we just list them, as you can see on the left. And this is a real example, abbreviated, of course, from the California Institute of Individual Studies. I helped them get through accreditation using empowerment evaluation. And we had communication. By the way, any organization you're in, trust me, probably the 2 things that will come up no matter what, funding and communication, they always come up. But anyway, this one was communication, teaching, funding, product development, etc. Here's how the process works. And this is the core of empowerment evaluation in many respects. You put your initials up on top, nothing confidential. And for each one, communication, you say, how would you rate that? On a 10 is perfect, 1's terrible. That's mine. I was actually the research director and professor over there and helped them get through accreditation. And I gave it a 3. Very honest. We never had agendas. We had overlapping meetings. We had people just pick up the phone 10 minutes before a meeting, before they want to have a meeting, and say, yeah, drop everything you're doing. Let's go down and have a meeting together. I plan 2 to 3, 4 months in advance. I can't just drop everything I'm doing for a random meeting. It's like, so communication to me was terrible. Now, listen to all the evidence I gave. The evidence I just gave is what you use when you get to plans for the future or next step. Instead of me coming up with ideas how to improve communication that are just out of the blue, they'll be related to the evidence I just gave. So when we get over there in a second, I'm going to say we want to do what? To to move on to plan for the future? Well, I'm going to say we want to improve communication. I'll get to that in a second. But then what are you going to do? Well, I could say, oh, this brilliant idea of a kiosk online, it has nothing to do with the evidence I just gave. It should be, let's start having agendas. Let's not have overlapping meetings. None of these impromptu kind of endless calls with no planning. That becomes the strategy when we get to plans for the future. So I highlight that now as I'm talking about evidence, because it's the evidence that tells you where the group wants to go to make it relevant. Anyway, and that's, it's not a small point. I read hundreds, sometimes thousands of strategic plans every year for folks to review them. And they're brilliant, but they go nowhere because they weren't rooted in the evaluation like we're talking about right now. Anyway, I give it a 3. The SEC happens to be a secretary, that's her initials. She gave it a 3. So she elbows me and said, David, you're closer to this other guy over here in the middle. Could you ask him why he's giving out 6? So I go, okay. And you know who the other guy is? The dean. But okay, anyway. So I elbow him and I go, she elbows me and I go, what's the deal here? Everyone else is giving a 3, a 2, maybe a 4. You're giving it a 6? Why? He says, oh, David, from my perspective as the dean, I think we communicate very well compared to the entire institute. If we had just done a survey, we never would have known that. It's because of the dialogue that we then created 2 levels of communication, internal and external. Very powerful. So the dialogue is as important, if not more important, than the numbers in this case. The numbers become a jumping off point. Anyway, you can see we still average it across so that someone might have a minority opinion of a 1 or a 9, but we look at what's overall, where are we? Now this is important because this is sort of the first time as a group we're taking into account where we think things are. This will become our baseline. We'll have that intervention I'll mention in a minute, plans for the future, but then we'll come back to taking stock 3 months, 6 months from now to see where we are in these things. Anyway, we did the same thing for teaching, funding. Let me highlight one more if I could, as long as we're still hanging out together. Product development. Well, that's where you hand out these brochures and highlight the program, the academic program, let other people know about it so that new students can come in. Well, I thought it was pathetic. I didn't see a thing going on, to be honest with you, about helping to recruit new students, diverse faculty. It was just, I think, what's going on here? Given the aspirations of the place, which were wonderful about what they're trying to do, to have a much more diverse, culturally diverse kind of institute. And I didn't see it happening, all the recruitment efforts. Anyway, so I gave it a 1. The secretary, she maybe saw more than I did, so she gave it a 4. So I go, okay, what's the deal? You're giving it an 8? Now keep in mind, I should emphasize, I had an office here. This guy, the dean, had an office, I kid you not, 4 or 6 feet away from me, okay? He proceeds to explain, he does 1,000 brochures a month. He does public television spots. He does public radio spots. He has Friday night sessions for recruits. He was doing a ton. His failure was not communicating what he's doing to the rest of the group internally. So we had no idea. We now know, he's 1 office away. I had no idea he was doing all that stuff. We now know from this dialogue that we can rely on him to help get the word out in ways we had no concept of, our hope was to get, but now we knew we had this resource. So sometimes my point is that it's not just evaluative, it's actually sometimes illuminative. We're learning about each other and our strengths within the organization, not just here's where we are, cut and dry. Anyway, you get the idea. Let me mention 2 more things and I'll move on. You can see if you go down, you can see I get a 3, 4, 5, 1. On average, I'm a 3.25. And then the dean, what a surprise, is about, on average, his scores or his ratings are 5.25, etc. Now, why do I do that? Well, you can see who's optimistic and pessimistic, I guess. It's kind of cool, But beyond that, in evaluation terms, it's norming. Now, when someone asks me, not my religious, cultural, etc. stuff, but my evaluative core, when they say, what do you think of something? They go, David thought it was positive if I think it's higher, because they know that my core is a little bit lower for how I evaluate things. And of course, we take with a grain of salt what the dean has to say, because he's always a little bit more on the positive side. My point is you get to know each other and what these numbers mean over time as you keep on doing this. This is critical. You remember I mentioned how you turn things upside down. If you look at this, I do an average of the averages. So if you look at the whole program, they gave themselves, and this is actually for real, a 4.25 on a 10-point scale. Think about it. If Pamela or I went in and said, okay, we've known you for like a couple hours or whatever, and I'm giving you like a 4.25 on a 10-point scale. Pamela, they go, see you later. David say, stay in California. You don't know anything, you don't know us, etc. If they give it to themselves, they ask, Pamela, David, how can you help us? It changes the whole dynamic nature of our relationship and wanting the data, etc. Anyway, you get the idea. I won't go on too long, but you get the idea. Mission, taking stock has the first part of prioritization, because you can't do everything in life, so you help the group focus in on core aspects. And then you get into a rating of very specific things. The evidence that you learn and you get from this dialogue shapes the next slide, which is plans for the future. You help the group come up with goals, and the goals can't be just out of nowhere. That's what happens in a lot of projects. They should be related to what you just evaluated. One of them was communication, so it should be improved communication, not complicated. Strategies, use agendas, use the evidence you heard versus all these great, brilliant ideas that you could come up with that are very cool, very PC, whatever it might be at the time. That's great. But what did the people just say that just evaluated? What did they say the reasons were? That's what you use agendas. And what's credible evidence? And by the way, I often have donors involved, as well as folks in the community, as well as staff. So you get everyone mixed together and talk about what is credible. So you don't have people pulling the rug out from under you at the end. So anyway, it could be agendas, it could be a schedule of the meetings to see if they are overlapping, etc. You tie it to that evidence. And that's pretty much it. That's the core of the 3 steps. And I don't know if many of you know, but I brought my family to Mount Everest Base Camp 2 years ago. That's me on the left. And when you get past sort of the tree line, it's like being on the moon. It's all rocks and you can't really breathe very well. But my dad used to say, and this is really true, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. If you have a plan based on your mission, based on your assessment, your ratings about where you are, then your plans for the future make more sense, because then you have an intellectual coherence where that plan for the future is rooted in your evaluation, which is rooted in your mission. And you have a higher probability of accomplishing your objectives. Let me mention one more thing, because I love this thing, and that you can use this for anything. Once you've done all that, you got to monitor it. You got to have some idea what roadmap. So we came up with an evaluation dashboard, and it has a couple key components. It has the actual performance of what you do. It has milestones, what you expect to do each quarter, and then actual goals for the year. The baseline is what you did the year before. Let me just show you what this looks like. So it's so simple, so powerful. Watch this. We have a tobacco prevention program, as I mentioned, in Arkansas. And one of the things that they want to do in a county is to have smoke-free parks. Well, the baseline is 1. They had last year, they had 1. This year, they want to have 4. So you put 4 all the way through the year, 4. Milestones, we had expect to get 1 the first quarter, 1 more the second, 1 more the third, and 1 more the fourth. And when you don't know what you're doing, by the way, which is what most of us are doing when we do projects, because they're just our best guess, you simply take the 4 you have and you divide by 4. When you know what you're doing, then you might make milestones 0 for the first quarter, because you then know that they don't even meet in the city council till, say, December or January, so you're not going to be able to do anything. But if you don't know that, you just divide by 4. When you learn it, you can modify and make the milestones more realistic. The bottom line is, when you work with the group in the first couple of weeks and you come up with milestones, goals, and what they did last year, the only thing they have to do for the rest of the year is keep track of their actual performance. And as you can see, in the first quarter, they got a 0. No big deal. No one gets slapped on the wrist and told you can't go forward, you're in trouble, we're going to defund you. You say, okay, you need help. Let's go find someone in the community who's done this really well. And we find someone, and they explain what they've done that's been very effective. And guess what? You learn from that, and sure enough, suddenly you can get back on track. Do you have 2? No, you have 1, and you build on that so you're more on track. The idea is you have many mid-course opportunities to improve and correct if the strategies are not working. So you're more likely to get there. If you wait to the end, it's too late. Anyway, I'll keep on going. You get the idea. And You can visually represent it in a simple way because most people are not reading the reports anyway. So why not just put in a graph? This one, actual is 0, see? And then milestones, the blue over here, supposed to be 1. 1, again, you get for your actual, and you should have had 2, fine. 3, a policymaker goes, oh, they're on track. 3 for 3, 4 for 4, etc. They'll look at that and be able to say, oh, I know where we are. And you can put it in this format in a table. And you can see in this case, the group can then focus on advocacy. Advocacy. Because look, in the second quarter, they've exceeded their annual goals already. It's not saying, oh, I'm great, I'm wonderful, just out of the blue. It's based on data. If you want to know more about what I just highlighted, these are the books to look at. The one with the globe, that brings together phenomenal examples of our work with Hewlett-Packard, a $15 million project, bridging the digital divide, mostly for Native Americans here in the United States and San Diego in particular, 18 tribes we worked with, work in Peru, work with 5th graders, young kids doing this as well as the tobacco prevention work I work with in Arkansas. The second one, as you can see, highlights the different approaches, so you can pick and choose as to what is most appropriate for you to have stakeholder involvement. The third one focuses more on the principles guiding empowerment evaluation, ranging from respecting community knowledge to improvement to accountability. And the last one on the right is a much more detailed picture of the $15 million project we did with Hewlett-Packard, just as references to have a little bit more detail. I'm open for questions. I hope that was helpful as a sort of quick way of looking at collaborative, participatory, and empowerment evaluation as ways of a deep dive into pragmatic ways to do what Pamela was talking about in terms of having that sensitivity, that respect, that understanding while you're doing an evaluation. So let me turn it back over to you for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And we've seen tons of encouraging comments in the chat already. Just as we start our Q&A here, I'll encourage you, if you have a question, to submit it using the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom program. If you don't have a question, you can still go to the Q&A panel and use the thumbs up feature to vote on which question you'd like to see answered. Our first question comes from Diane, and they ask, have you seen any examples where these types of evaluation are used to make funding decisions? Can review process be adapted to encourage this type of evaluation?
Oh, definitely. A lot of foundations, I should say, are definitely interested in capacity building. They're interested in learning rather than just straight traditional accountability only. And it definitely shapes funding without question. Let me highlight why this is really obviously really important question. With empowerment evaluation in particular, and I think most forms of evaluation, if it's done right, if you let a group show all the things that they've done well with funding, they're more open to showing all the things that are not working at all, but that would work potentially if they had funding, because they have shown a track record of what they've accomplished with funding. If everything is wonderful, what do you need money for? So the idea is not just wait, have people gotten money for it? Of course they have, absolutely. It's more that it shapes the whole dynamic between a funder and an evaluator when you talk about using it in a sense for advocacy, but basically a funder wants to know, oh, you're able to accomplish all this with money, so now I can trust you a little bit more to take this risk and move forward with it. I want to highlight one other point really quickly, as long as you ask that question, because I think all of us are kind of messed up. I think we all have been socialized incorrectly. I think that evaluators need to let go a little bit more and have folks be in charge more, whether it's empowerment or other approaches. When I work in communities, very often they'll go, oh, this is a great idea. And then in the middle, they'll go, push comes to shove, they're in a rush, they're held accountable for them. David, you're the expert, you go ahead. No, you will do it because they're socialized into this thing. And let me add this last one, because that relates to your question. We, I think, are messed up in terms of our perspective of funders. We think, oh, drop off the money and let's do our stuff. We're missing the boat. They are investing in all these different social programs, which are just theories, quite frankly, of what might work and the best way to go. And we're not tapping them for that. Anyway, my point in sort of long-winded way to respond to that question is we need to also rethink how we think about our roles, including the funder, when we think about asking for more money, they'll want to see us say, what can you do with what you have first? And that's reasonable. But then, as I say, if you line it up and show what you have been able to accomplish with funding, you can be very honest, and you need the evaluation to show where you are weak and where things haven't worked, and that funding could help. Anyway, I'll pass it over. Pam, if you had some thoughts on that as well, but I think that's a really fundamental question in terms of money. We're all concerned about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next question actually came from two users. They're almost identical. So I think it's a really relevant topic. The question is this: how do you apply this evaluation method and dashboard for more complex changes, or when you're monitoring less quantitative goals, such as increased trust or more meaningful collaboration?
Yeah, I do that right now with the Addiction Studies program in Arkansas. And one of the things we're trying to do is build up faculty fundraising, getting money, grants, et cetera. So it actually fits in with the last question too. And instead of it being numerical, which it could be, oh, you should get 10 grants within, a year, 5-year period. Well, of course you can have that. But no, we're also having something like you're talking about, much more descriptive. One of them is, for example, the first quarter, review all the RFPs to see what's out there. Second one, actually write for a subsection of them. Third one, go through orals and more in-depth interaction with a funder to see what you can work out, because they're going to negotiate whether they really want to work with you, what kind of amount of money, et cetera. And by the fourth, actually have a funded effort to move forward with. Similarly, you could do it with trust. What kinds of things we need to do in the first quarter, and that could be meeting with some of the tribal elders to see whether this is even allowable or permissible or useful, et cetera. It could be the second stage, actually doing a presentation for a large part of the community, maybe multi-tribe kind of presentation to see if they're open, who's open to this as well. You see what I mean? And then the third quarter, actually facilitating some work with some Native Americans that you're working with, so that they're doing it with you, and you may be leading the facilitation initially, but with them, with the idea that then the second one or third one, they're leading it and you're behind them, helping them, et cetera. And by the fourth is actually a handoff. So that's a quick example of quarter by quarter. And you can do them over years, of course, of how to build trust, how to transfer over the relationship, how to get funding. You can use it for many things other than the quantitative. I highlight the numbers in the presentation just because of the easiest way to conceptualize in a short period of time how to use this. But you should be using it as a logic model of step by step that someone else would find credible. Go, oh, I think if you follow those steps, you could probably do okay. And just do the descriptive part. Now, I probably owe you $5 because I do specialize in ethnography, so that probably I could highlight the ethnographic approaches to it. But let me pass it on, Ahmed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think picturing it as a logic model is quite helpful. Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I was just saying you can hear it working at home sometimes, but in the background. But yeah,
yeah, that's just the reality these days, for sure. Our next question comes from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, how do you convince people, especially executives, to make time to evaluate together when everyone is trying to do more with less?
I can jump in, but tell me, I don't want to take it over. Pamela, if you have some ideas on it, but I work with a lot of execs then, and usually what's powerful is when they really know that there's a lot that they don't know. And that's, not always the case, that they're open and willing to listen to what's going on in the community or the organization they're working with. It does make a difference when you have the ear of management to move things forward. Usually, I'm typically called in when there's a crisis rather than at the early stages. I'm sure Pamela has the same experience. If it could get in the beginning, it'd be much easier. But because of a crisis, very often someone that's a supervisor or head of an organization is very receptive to finding out how to turn this around, because they're already in trouble and they need to get things aligned and focused. I think when this is going to sound terrible, when you highlight self-interest, then you're successful. The idea is to find common denominators of self-interest. So, quick example to make that a little clearer, not sound so weird. When I'm working with Oakland, the public school system, the superintendent wants to reduce the dropout rate. Well, we work with teachers, and of course we help them with pedagogy, we help them with different activities that can engage students, and it can increase attendance if it's done correctly. You have nurses that they're firing left and right because they're very educated, they're very bright, but all they're allowed to do is put a Band-Aid on someone's arm because of litigation. Well, they, when we work with them, say, well, we want to improve everybody's health. Well, that's nice, but how do you want to do that? If you have them focus on, say, asthma, then they give specialized training for kids who have asthma. Guess what? You've now reduced the number that have to go to the hospital because they know how to take care of themselves. You've reduced the number that have had to just drop out and go home, et cetera. Well, that's now in alignment with what the superintendent wants because it helps reduce the dropout rate. When you get these common denominators of self-interest, he now is interested in what they are doing, and that is part of this. He's listening. My point is that most of what we're talking about is not done in a vacuum. Empowerment and other things are done within the context of what everyone's held accountable for. So the more you can line up and align what people are able to do from their perspective to help accomplish these larger objectives, the more likely that you're going to get alignment and interest as far as a senior member of management, whatever it may be. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you so much. We have time for one or two more questions. Our next one comes from Ron, and they ask, has this work ever been applied to asset-based community work initiatives?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No question about it. I think Pamela both, I think, have experienced this, where people who are philosophically oriented towards what we're talking about, and these kinds of orientation of respecting community knowledge, of building on strengths, appreciative inquiry, et cetera, really are right on board with collaborative, participatory, and empowerment approaches without question. I think the harder areas are people who are much more hierarchical, authoritative, and totally not trusting, that have a difficulty with this approach. But even those folks, we've been able to convince many of them because they can see that these are approaches that don't sort of say, abdicate anyone's responsibility, because the biggest problem with authoritarian kinds of places, and there are many, and I know no place is perfect, is that they're afraid that you're giving the power away to everybody, and that as a supervisor, I'm not in charge anymore. How am I going to make this happen? You remind folks that they're still accountable, and that these folks are still accountable to you as a supervisor, but now you're holding them accountable to what they said they would do to help you get to those objectives. And suddenly they start going, oh, I get it. So even in those kind of structures, which we've been successful in, they're effective, they work, but they are much slower and they don't get as much accomplished as a place that's philosophically aligned. So I'm not saying, like Joyce Keller did a beautiful work in a Texas audit agency to prove that these kinds of approaches can even work in that kind of environment. And it's great, we proved that can be done. Do I personally spend as much time in that kind of organization versus one that's philosophically in the same direction as me? I don't as much, because we don't have so much time in life. How much do you want to devote? I can go much faster and further with a philosophically, a group that's philosophically oriented in my direction towards social justice issues, towards trying to improve people's lives, et cetera. I'm not saying you can't, and I know we can. We have done successful in other areas, but that's a personal choice you have to make as an evaluator, as a community change agent, et cetera. And some places, don't get me wrong, some folks have a legitimate argument to say they might need it more. So I'm not against that. It's just I've made my own personal decisions to do more work in places that are philosophically aligned. But certainly it has been done, and the asset folks definitely get it. Because they understand building on strengths. It fits in perfectly. We've done a lot of work in that area as well, specifically. So the quick yes.
I would also add that actually, in these kinds of environments where, if there's collective impact work going on, or if there's some other work where there's multi-sectoral involvement, then as David was saying, it's a slower process to build that trust, possibly to engage people in an evaluation experience that would have more meaningful outcomes in the end for them, where there's an opportunity to build those relationships. It would come on the sort of the pre-evaluation planning process, actually. And that is more of, and in working in asset-based environments, I think it's probably an easier sell than in even like multi-sectoral processes or in communities where there's several different types of stakeholders that are being impacted by the programs that are being done. Anyway, that would be our last question. We've sort of run out of time, but I wanted to say a big thank you to you, David, and to everyone who's participated in the webinar today. And thank you to Duncan for your excellent technical support as usual. Thank you everyone for being here. Duncan just has a couple of announcements.
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. Just before we wrap up, I have just a few quick learning opportunities I want to put in front of you. You can find all of these at tamarackcommunity.ca. The first is a new online course that we've launched called Foundations of Community Engagement. It's entirely self-directed. It'll help you build your community engagement toolkit at your own pace. The second is one of our most popular workshops. It's called Turf, Trust, and Virtual Collaboration. And it's a workshop that focuses on the core leadership competency of trust building. And lastly, we have Collective Impact 3.0 with Tamarack's Sylvia Chu and Liz Weaver that digs into the collective impact approach. We'll be in touch over the next few days with an email that includes a recording of this presentation, a copy of the slides, and any of the resources mentioned. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.